Okay, now that we've made the wine glass, the wine bottle, and the cup, now what we're going to do is we're going to put them into some kind of a context and create a scene, and this will give you the opportunity to see how we can create transparent objects, glass objects, and reflections, and also refractions. So to start with, we're going to do a little trick. Now if I'm back here, and here again is my wine glass, and instead of creating a separate floor, what I want to do is I want to build it into the object, and we can do that without damaging the object at all. Okay, now first of all I got to do is go into the second layer, put the wine glass in the background, and I'm just going to go ahead and create my box here. So I can create the box like so, give it a little bit of depth, and I'm going to move it just to the bottom so the glass is already sitting on it. And I can make that as big as I want, so I'll just go ahead and make it a little bigger than this. And that should probably be sufficient. And we'll just line that up with the glass, like so. Okay, and I'm going to do something else as well. As you can see, if we look here, we've got the glass in a context. I'm actually going to create a wall too. What the heck? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a third layer here, and I'm going to put both these other layers in that context. So then I'm going to go here and create another box. I'm going to have that, doesn't really matter where it ends. I'm going to park that right back there. Just has to be in the distance. I can make that a little taller. So now, basically, our object has a little shadow box to go with it. And so while I'm on this layer, I'm going to turn off box. I'm going to go into polygon mode. I'm going to select this surface. I'm going to go into change surface. I'm going to call it wall. And I'm going to give that kind of a bluish color. And then I'm going to go into this one, select that surface. So I'm going to change surface. That one's going to be floor. And that's sufficient. Okay, so then when I go into the layout program, I'm going to go ahead and put this in perspective view, and when I load the object, just going to load glass. You see it comes with all of its baggage. So then if I go to camera view, save myself a little time. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to set the modify move to camera. Then I'm going to go in on this. Going to go, let's say go up a little bit in this case. And I'm going to rotate down slightly. And so there, of course, is my glass. And I'm going to move this light out of the way. Move back here, let's say. And then I'm going to load the bottle as well. Now the bottle is coming in a lot bigger. Now here we got to do a little bit of modifications. If we go down to this little control here, we can see that we can select multiple layers of the bottle. Right now only layer 2 is selected, that's the cork. So I'm going to hold the shift key and select the second layer as well. That allows me to move the whole thing with the cork. I'm also going to, under modify, choose size and bring that down so that it's a lot smaller. And so I'm going to move this, say, back behind the glass and maybe over here to this side. And then finally, I'm going to load the cup, which is called coffee. There's coffee. and that's really big. So we're going to move this over here, let's say, and we're going to make it smaller, and we're going to move that back, let's say like that. And lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to go to camera, and we're going to move camera in a little bit more and rotate it down slightly so that we see our scene. Okay, and so then let's see what this actually looks like. I hit the F9 button, and we see we've got our basic scene, and everything looks the same. Everything's got kind of a ceramic, plasticky look, and so we've got the actual models in place. Now it's time to actually enjoy them. So one of the first things I want to do is, at least temporarily, I want to move my camera in a little bit. So I'm going to come down, I'm going to rotate up, and I'm going to move in on the objects. Not quite so far. And let's say I want to get a look here. So what I want to do is I want to start with the glass and see what we can do with that. So I'm going to go over to Surface Editor, and Surface Editor, we got the glass, and basically I'm going to look at the default surface, and the default surface currently is white. I'm going to make that, at least temporarily, a green glass. So once I do that, it turns green. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn up the transparency a little bit. Now when I do that, we see that we get some kind of impossible geometry because there is no inside to the surface of the glass. I'm going to change that by making it double-sided. That way the glass surface has an inside and an outside, which will reflect in on itself. And then we're going to go ahead and give it some specularity and some reflection. And we're going to keep the reflections a little bit low at this point. And also, we're going to give it a refract. Well, we'll do that next. We'll take a little bit more transparency because the glass itself should be basically transparent, but we'll start with that. I'm also going to hit smoothing, because if you look closely, you can see a little bit of geometry there. If I hit smoothing, that will work that out. Okay, so let's see what we got so far. I'll hit F9 again. So if we look at this, we can see that the glass actually looks okay. It's got some reasonably good qualities, but notice how the handle of the cup, which we see through the glass, is not being distorted by the glass. And that is because the glass is not being told to do that. So that's refraction. And with surfaces, we can give them a refraction index as well. So let's do that. Let's turn up our refraction index. Doesn't have to be by much. In fact, if you use too much, it goes a little crazy. I'm going to up the reflections a little bit as well, and the glossiness. And let's see what we get with that. And lo and behold, you can see a difference. Now if you look here, you can see that the handle of the cup is being bent in some way by the glass, and it actually looks pretty good. The glass has kind of a milky feel, and you can see that there are things being reflected into it. And so let's say that this is a reasonably good glass at this point, and let's work on the bottle for a minute. So if we go to our bottle, and we're going to look at the default surface, which is gray, I want to make the bottle kind of a brown color, brownish red. So let's start with that, and let's give it some specularity. Now the bottle, it doesn't have to be quite as much detail as the glass because it's not going to be all that transparent. We'll give it a little bit of transparency, but not all that much. And we're going to turn on double-sided and smoothing as well. And that will give you the kind of specular qualities you would see. And we're going to up the glossiness so that our highlights are relatively small. And let's see what that does. So if we look here, we can see that we now have a more realistic looking bottle, but it still has a few issues. We don't have any reflections, which is becoming an issue here, and maybe it should be a little bit more transparent. It looks kind of like a ceramic bottle, so we'll go with that as well. So if we go over to surface area, let's give it a little bit more transparency, and let's add some reflections in there and see what that does. Okay, so here we see there's maybe a little bit too much reflections there, maybe too much transparency. We'll tone those down a little bit, but I also want to talk about the cork. The cork we can do something with. Right now it's a gray cork. Let's see if we can make it a real cork. So first of all, let's go into Surface Editor again, and turn down the reflections a little bit, and maybe a little bit less transparency. And then when I go to the cork, you see we got gray again. What I want to do is I want to actually put some cork texture into there. So if I go into color and go to the T mode there for texture, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to wrap cork around that. So I'm going to choose cylindrical under image map, and I'm going to load an image. And it just so happens we've got a really nice image of cork. It even says cork. So there it is. And if you look up there, you can see that it's kind of there, but not quite. So the first thing we need to do is turn on automatic sizing, and that looks a little bit better. And that's on the Z-axis. If we put it on the Y-axis, though, I think that looks more realistic. The X-axis, not so much. So let's stick with the Y-axis. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to use that texture, and I'm going to do the same with the bump map. So I'm going to go into the bump map and choose cylindrical under image map, and choose the same image, put it in the Y-axis, and automatically size it, and give it a little bit of texture amplitude, not much really. And so let's see what that did for us. Okay, now I'd say the glass is just about right, and you see the cork looks good. And let's just go ahead and work on the cup for a second. So I'm going to go into Surface Editor, and where we have coffee, I'm just going to go and choose the main surface there. And I want this to be a kind of a dark blue cup. I'm going to turn on smoothing. I'm not going to do double-sided because this is not going to be a transparent cup. I am going to give it some specularity and a little bit of, some glossiness. Have it like a nice, make it pretty glossy. A little bit of reflection. And let's see what that does to the scene. Okay, so you see now we've got all of the objects basically ready to go. And if you look at the window here, we can see some reflections in the cup and the glass and the bottle, and they look actually pretty realistic. So now we're just going to work on the background and we'll be done. So let's say we start with the floor. So if we go to Surface Editor and we go to the glass, and that's where we have the floor object, and I'm going to make that a wooden table. So let's say we go to the texture. In this case, I'll stick with planar under image map, and I'm going to load another image, and this will be this birchwood floor, birchwood table, let's say. So it'll have like a restaurant feel to it. Now you see here, you can see that it's copied the image multiple times. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit automatic sizing, and now you see the image is off axis. If I hit the Y-axis, that looks a little better, and the X-axis. Actually, I think the Y-axis kind of brings out the wood grain the best. And I'm going to go with that. I'm going to use that texture. It doesn't have to be all that complicated. And I'm not going to bother with a bump map in this case. I'm just going to put some specularity on there. I'm not going to use any reflection because let's make that a nice industrial surface there. A nice professional table. And let's see what that did for the scene. Okay, so we see that this looks pretty good as is. And so the last thing we want to do is we want to see if we can put a background in there. And so we could make that any kind of a wall that we want. I want to try something a little different. I want to actually put like a scene in the background. So if we're going to do that, what we'll do is we'll go to the surface editor once again, and this time we'll choose wall. And I'm going to go ahead and load a picture of a restaurant. So I'll keep it planar, and I'm going to load in one more image. And in there I find this restaurant picture. And of course when we do that, first of all it goes nuts because it tiles it. So I'll hit automatic sizing once again. And lo and behold, that's actually pretty good. And so I'm going to use this texture, and I'm going to adjust the luminosity. This is like a rear screen projection. So if I bring the luminosity up, I can actually make it glow as if there's light coming from that direction. And that's really all we have to do. So let's see what this would look like all together. Okay, how about that? That's got a pretty realistic feel to it. I mean, maybe not perfect. We could probably adjust the lighting to make it match the rest of the scene a little bit. I would say it's pretty good. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a final version of this. So if I go up to the Render tab, I go into Render Globals, I'm going to make this, say, 1500 pixels by 1000 pixels. And so that will give us that kind of a look. And let's see how that renders out. Okay, so now we can see the finished product here. And if we look at the rendered image, we can see that it's pretty good. And I'm going to go ahead and save this, save RGB, and of course this will be PNG 24 because there's no transparency necessary. And I'm going to put that on the desktop as restaurant scene. Okay, so this is the final image, and you can see it looks pretty good. And if we creep in on this, we can see that we have reflections. We can even see that the background image is reflected in areas of the glass. How about that? So we've got quite a lot going on here, and this is getting to the point where it's hard to tell that it's computer graphics. I'm not saying it's perfect. You can see the detail in the cork there, but you'd have to look at it twice to know that it's computer graphics. And if you add just a little bit more to this, you can make it so that it's virtually impossible to distinguish. And so this is an example of rendering using reflective shapes and transparencies and refractions.